Right, so we'll make a start. So hello everyone, my name's Brett Lanios. I'm part of the project coordination team for EBCU. So welcome to this workshop. It's our third workshop. If you could mute your microphones, that would be much appreciated. One thing I would say is there is a chat window in this facility at the bottom. So once Tim, I want to hand over to Tim and he starts talking to the panel. If I could ask you to please put your questions in the chat window, and what I'm going to do is read out the questions to Tim when he prompts me to. So it should be fairly straightforward, and I hope you have a very good, enjoyable workshop. And the only other thing I would say is there is an evaluation which you'll have had when you got your Eventbrite notification. So if you could please complete the evaluation near the end of the workshop, that'd be much appreciated. And I will put a link to that to the chat window as well. And I think that's it from me. So I'm going to hand over to Bo, who will do the introduction as chairman of the European Beer Consumers Union. Over to you, Bo.
Yeah, thank you, Brett. I not hope my microphone is too windy. I'm in the absolutely most northern part of Denmark right now, but it's sunny and I have beer, so I'm prepared for this seminar. And yes, I'm a chairman of European Beer Consumers Union, an umbrella organization for national consumer organizations in the beer world in 19 countries around Europe. We started up this seminar a few months ago to do a network organization, to run a network organization in times like this is a little tricky. As Simon Spillane said a few months ago, I had a meeting with him, was that you got stuck in your network now. You can't do anything about your network. You can call them and you can't expand, you can't do anything. But we are a network organization of national beer consumer unions worldwide Europe. Beer consuming, yes, you are a lot of beer consumers, but actually into the consumer rights, there's not so many organized organizations about that. I think in Denmark we have one for chocolate too, but beer is the biggest one, of course, and the one who actually involves the most people. Also in the brewing industry, there's a lot of issues around this, and the breweries actually depend on the consumers and the other way around. So we are working on, as you can see on our website, we are working on 3 major points in these things. One of them is, of course, diversity in beers. When you are a consumer, you go to a beer shop as well, and you have to be sure about the diversity of beers, and also on national level especially, but also when you go abroad to other countries as well as beer drinkers. Also, we are a little about ingredients. Please tell the consumer what's in the beer and who brewed it and the information. That's good consumer business as well from the brewer side. It's been better. And I also know that the food industry has been better to actually tell about what's in it nowadays. But the brewing industry had that thinking for the many years ago. So of course, please label the beer and tell us all about it. And of course, the third thing is pricing. We don't say we want cheap beer, but we want a fair price. Pricing about beers is an issue from the big breweries, also an issue for small breweries, especially in these times when we can't go to a bar. We have to go to our local brewery to buy beers and all that kind of thing. So also the pricing is a big issue for the consumer. And then beer consuming umbrella organization as EBCU is a lot of networking. We are talking together minimum twice a year on our delegate meeting and just do best practice for consumers on national level in different countries. of course, in Northern Europe, in the Nordic countries, and also in Ireland as well, is a bit about the taxation of beers is huge. It's not the same problem they have in the Czech Republic and Italy, something like that. But we have a lot of different issues as consumer and consumer organization, how you can organize your national organization as well. So EBCU is what it's all about, and we are behind these meetings, but and some of the people is also have the roots in European Beer Consumers Union. But please go to our website, actually updated yesterday with some new key points and all that kind of things, and read more about it. And I'll be here on at least on the sound side. So if anyone has some questions during the meeting, please be welcome as well.
Thank you, Bo.
Any questions anyway now, then just go back to Brett. Thank you, Brett.
Thank you, Bo. So yes, just to repeat for people who've arrived a little bit later, if you could mute your microphones, I'm going down, so you should be muted. If you wish to ask a question, please do so via the chat window by clicking at the bottom, clicking on the chat window. And what I'm going to do every so often, I'll prompt, I'll let Tim know what the questions that have come in. And the final thing for me is if you could complete an evaluation at the end, that would be much appreciated. And if you have any suggestions for a workshop, please do put them, go onto the website, the EBCU website on the events page, and pop your suggestions in. And possibly you wish to present a workshop. Okay, thanks very much. I'm going to hand over to Tim now, who's going to run the workshop. And my thanks to Tim and the rest of the panel from me. So over to you, Tim.
Thanks, Brett. Good evening. Welcome to this seminar about the future of beer and brewing in Europe after COVID. I'm Tim Webb, and I'm going to be hosting the discussion this evening. We're very fortunate to have a panel of experts who are each very eminent in different fields within the world of beer. To discuss how we think the COVID pandemic and the various international reactions to the pandemic is going to affect beer and brewing in the broadest sense as we've come to know it. I'll just repeat a few of the housekeeping points. If you could all remain muted, that would be great. We've had some really lovely background noises coming in other seminars, which have proved quite interesting. I can assure you that having you all muted is a very weird experience for the panelists, but we'll try to deal with it. With regard to the questions that you're welcome to put into the chat room, I just remind you this is a seminar that's very much about beer and brewing. We're not really going to be discussing pubs very much, and for those of you in the UK, I'm afraid this is one where cider is excluded. Finally, if you might just note behind me, looks a little bit like a renovation project. This is because it is a renovation project. About 4 weeks ago, I moved my little apartment in Bristol into a large farmhouse in Devon that's at the top of a hill and remarkably cold. It involved taking stuff from 3 different storage areas and putting them into one house. And it appears that all of the rubbish has ended up in my office. I promise you it'll be sorted out. As I promised my partner, it'll be sorted out sometime in the next 6 months, but not today. Anyway, I'm going to start by asking our panel to introduce themselves and to say something about what they think about the bigger picture of the pandemic. I'm going to go first. I'm Tim Webb. I've been active in the beer consumer movement for over 40 years now. I also write books about beer. Most prominently Good Beer Guide Belgium, which I wrote for about 25 years until a couple of years ago. I've now done 3 editions of a book called The World Atlas of Beer, and that deals with how beer is doing all around the globe, which involves me and my co-author keeping touch with stringers in different countries, about 35 different countries around the world. And incidentally, we've had to update the latest edition, which came out in October. We're updating it for the American imprint, and that's involved us contacting all our national stringers to see how COVID has been impacting. The biggest fear I have about the pandemic is that governments will use the undoubted battering that the brewing and hospitality industries have taken in the last 15 months as an excuse to try to reduce sales of alcohol, and will do relatively little to help struggling producers, retailers, and others in the beer world to get back into business. In contrast, the most unexpected thing I've seen in the pandemic has been the speed with which many breweries, smaller independent ones in particular, have been able rapidly to transform their whole business models to react to the imposed restrictions. For example, shifting from draft to container beers, and from away from selling via wholesalers to delivering direct to consumers. And that gives me hope that they will be able to survive after the pandemic. That's me. Simon, would you like to go next?
Thank you, Tim, and thank you, Bo, and colleagues at EBCU for inviting me to join this evening's panel. Good evening. My name is Simon Spillane. I'm a dual national. I'm a British and Belgian, living in Brussels, and I'm working at the Brewers of Europe for the last 17 years. I just had a quick look through the participants, and it's good to see some names down there of people who I've shared a beer with at the Brewers of Europe offices over the years, and I hope that time will be possible again in the not too distant future. I was muted by the host just then. I think that's the problem, Brett. I think anyway, but for those of you who don't know, the Brewers of Europe is the voice of the European beer industry towards European and global institutions. Our members are the national brewers associations from 29 European countries. Just in terms of the impact that COVID has had, I mean, we recently actually published a report that showed how beer hospitality declined by 42%, and the overall beer market declined by 9% in 2020 compared to 2019. And I think probably if you were to look at April 2020 to April 2021, obviously these figures would have been even more drastic, as they would have covered the full period of many of the closures. I think probably my biggest fear is the number of bars, pubs, and restaurants that simply won't reopen, or for whom the recovery won't come fast enough. We have contacts for the hospitality sector association here, and they're very concerned about the time that the recovery will take, and the fact that even places that will be reopening in very difficult conditions, and not with the same balance sheet as they had when they had to shut. So I think that's my sort of biggest fear. And perhaps on an optimistic note, I would say that what the lockdowns have perhaps made people really understand is the importance of beer and hospitality to communities, society, and the economy. And I don't think it's an exaggeration to say that probably never before have we had politicians talking so much about pubs and beer. We saw just today with them reopening in France, all the politicians wanted to be seen in bars, pubs, and cafes, and I think that is so. There is an increased recognition of the importance of our pubs and beer, and I think perhaps as sort of the counterpoint to Tim's concern, I think my hope is that these same people will see beer hospitality as a sector that can actually kickstart the economy, that can kickstart job creation, and actually kickstart society as a whole. So in the same way that the impact has been huge, the knock-on effects, so they also see this as a part of the society that can actually really push the recovery. Thank you, Tim.
Thank you, Simon. Ina. I need to unmute. You need to unmute.
Okay. Thank you for inviting me. Thank you to the hosts, Brett and Tim. I'm Ina. I come with a very funny and very Bavarian family name of Verstl. Usually pronounced as Verstl or sausage by foreigners, but I'm quite happy with that as long as people call me by my first name. I'm a business journalist. I write for Brauwelt. I have been covering the brewing industry for more than 20 years. So in terms of activism, no, I'm just a consumer. I like beer, and I have been following the saga of the pandemic from the point of view of a journalist who was worrying that she won't be able to write her weekly newsletter, except for all the doom mongering that told us in the early weeks of the pandemic last April that thousands of craft brewers would go out of business pronto. And fortunately, this is the good news, one of the good news that I'd like to start on. It didn't happen. So the long tail is still in business, surviving for all we know, and some actually did quite well. The other good news is that many managed, as Tim already said, to pivot to direct-to-consumer shipping, as it is called in the industry's lingo, selling beer directly to their consumers from brewery doors or doing deliveries, or what is the third thing? Web shops, most importantly. What worries me, and that is the bad news, is that I'm not so much sure that the governments will really clamp down on beer or alcohol for that matter, except by perhaps introducing minimum unit prices as the Irish plan to do. But what really worries me is what will happen to breweries once the various types of government support come to an end. I fear that we will see, at least in Germany, quite some bankruptcies as of Christmas this year. And that could really alter the face of the industry, because we're quite used to morbidity among heritage and legacy brewers, but I don't think that we are used or will be okay with the death toll as we fear it will be. What I also worry about is the long-term change to consumers' behavior. The American brewers have made much of at-home drinking occasions when people drink at home and what they do while they drink. I don't see this actually in practice over here, but I do wonder whether the pub experience will be as central to people's experience of beer as it was before COVID.
Somehow you've been muted, Ina.
So where did you stop hearing me? I was talking about the long-term changes, and one is the consumer behavior, especially amongst youngsters. I do worry that what I call flash mob drinking, that is meeting outdoors, in parks, in public spaces, and provide your booze courtesy of a rucksack, that this is going to actually persist because of the price difference between on-premise beer and cheap supermarket stuff. So these are some of the issues I'm concerned with. So hopefully you prove me wrong or can contradict me, but as said, okay. That's what I worry about.
CCC, that sounds as if it's nudging into your territory.
Right. So hi everybody. I'm Claus-Christian, shortly known as CCC. So I'm a full professor of psychology, and I have a special field of perception and also innovation, also about experience and also taste experience. So I have close contacts also as a beer sommelier to gastronomy and to pubs, to smaller breweries and so on. And for me, it's so important to stress that pubs and beer drinking is mostly a social thing. And I even say very openly that innkeepers, they are very, very important. They are pivotal in them. They're meaningful for people because they have really moderating abilities. For example, also for radicalism, they are a good medicine against. So my general fear is that these small, glittering, wonderful pubs, these beer gardens all around the world and so on, that they are really going away, and that we see a change of drinking behavior, and more to this pathological home drinking, lonely drinking, and also effect drinking. That's of course difficult, and it's difficult in two ways. Of course, alcoholism is an issue, but the second thing is also, it is a good reason to ban beer, our beloved beer, from public spaces or from other places, also to increase taxes and so on. This I also fear. And with the pandemic, there's also one interesting thing for me, because we're also working on so-called authentic marketing, and we are guiding all these SMEs through the pandemic, and we see
SMEs.
So small and medium enterprises. Okay. Sorry. So really the smaller breweries and so on. And we see two kinds of breweries and pubs and so on. One, they just wait, and they are now very, very hungry, but they just wait for the light at the end of the tunnel. And the second group, and they are mostly lost, and the second one is what you're also talking about, Tim, or what you talked about, is very creative solutions, very responsive behavior. And this is very inspiring, I have to say, because we have to develop a more resilient SME or culture, or brewery culture, pub culture, and so on, that is more adaptive to such crisis. This won't be the only crisis in the future, of course.
No, we have climate change coming over the horizon.
Yes, for example. Yeah.
Okay.
Right.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
We've got a couple of questions lined up in advance. The first one, we've covered part of this already. Do any of the members of the panel feel they have a clear picture of what's happened to the world of beer in the last 15 months across Europe? And has it been noticeably better or worse in any particular countries? I think I'm going to you, Simon, first again, if that's okay.
Thank you, Tim. I mean, I mentioned this this report that we commissioned and published a few weeks back, and so yes, I mean, we have a pretty good picture, just perhaps not the last 15 months, but just comparing 2020 with 2019. And as I mentioned, I mean, as everyone would expect, I mean, it's the beer sales in the hospitality sector that have really been hit, which are down 42%. What's interesting, beer sales in the retail sector were up 8%. So there is which basically compensated. So about a third of the volumes were picked up in retail, but that meant that overall beer sales were down 9%. So I mean, there has been certainly not been the shift from the on trade to the off trade, as some have tried to present, sort of with pictures of empty supermarket shelves. I mean, and in fact, I mean, these numbers vary hugely across countries, and perhaps we'll get into what is impacting that. What we also saw, and this is actually key to, I think, the questions around what the threats are about how governments will be reacting. What we actually want to look at is what has been the impact of that on the wider economy as well. And what the report showed was that previously there were around 2.6 million jobs created by beer in Europe, most of these being in the hospitality sector. And what the report estimated was that 860,000 jobs have been lost in beer hospitality as a direct result of the lockdowns and the decline in beer sales in pubs and restaurants. What it also showed was that governments have actually lost out on 11 billion euros in tax revenues, because of course there is excise, but there's also VAT on the sales that would have gone through the hospitality sector, but also all the taxes that are usually paid by the employees in these venues. And what we've also seen is that 13 billion euros in value added has been taken out of the economy. And what we want governments to recognize is that actually, if they want to get the economy going, if they want to increase their tax revenues again, what they need to do is recognize that getting beer hospitality back up to pre-COVID levels can actually return those jobs, can return the value, can return the tax revenues to the economy. So it's actually tax revenues will be increased by supporting beer, not by increasing beer taxes. And I think that if that point can be understood, and it's a tricky one to get across, then it's a clear would be a clear victory. And just in terms of sort of the comparing, you know, how different countries have fared. I mean, I'd say there are perhaps a couple of issues that obviously logically have impacted this. And firstly, it's basically been the extent of how hard has COVID hit that country, and how hard the restrictions have been, and the duration of these. And obviously, we know that there are still some countries that are still fully locked down, others where their places are open, but still operating at just outside or 50% capacity enclosures. And obviously, the other key factor that impacts the extent to which the brewing industry has been hit is the size of the hospitality sector itself. Because what we know is that there are countries where the hospitality sector is 10% of the beer market, or even less than 10% of the beer market. And then there are countries like Spain, Portugal, Malta, Greece, Italy, Ireland, where it's 60%, even up to 70% of the market. And these are obviously the countries where the impact has been immense. And as I say, also because unlike for other products, there hasn't been this switch across from the pub to supermarket purchases. And I think it was just mentioned. I mean, it's because it's the loss of the beer occasion, the experience, the pub experience, and that can't be recreated by simply having a drink at home on your own.
Yeah, I should point out to everyone that Simon, in his many responsibilities at Brewers of Europe, one of the things he does is produce Beer Trends, which is an annual report on the statistics of beer in different countries across Europe. I'm one of the small number of people, very sad people, who actually reads every single word of it every year. But it's fascinating to actually get, it's one of the best ways to get a really good grip on where beer is actually sold. And one of the things is beer is there's differentially more beer sold in on sales than off sales, and that's if you've got a hospitality outlet, regardless of where you are in Europe, the chances are there'll be a greater percentage of beer sold there than there would be, say, in a supermarket or an off sales outlet. I think I'm right in saying. But anyway, sorry, I'm going off script, which I should never do. The Ina, if I just remind you what the original question was, have you got a clear picture of what's happening across Europe in the last 15 months to beer and brewing, and is it worse in some countries than others?
It's certainly worse in some countries than others, and numerically that relates to what Simon has just said. I mean, depending on the size of the on-premise in terms of total beer sales, the decline was worse than for countries like Germany, where 80% of all beer is consumed at home or in parks, and I think I want to mention that as well, at festivals. This is going to be the second year that we will not have a Munich Oktoberfest. And that is just the most well-known event. I mean, throughout the year, we have thousands of Schützenfeste, or what we call Dulten, just seasonal festivals where lots of beer is consumed. I mean, these are all traditional things. And because of COVID regulations, they were cancelled last year and will be cancelled again this year. And they were also important for beer culture, although lots of people just went there to get sussled, I must confess. but it's part of your upbringing, certainly here in Bavaria, to go to these stews. And I do worry about their future, because I remember when the Second Gulf War broke out in the early 90s, suddenly all the carnival ballroom dancing events were cancelled for moral reasons, because it was deemed indecent to be partying while people were dying in the Gulf War. So when the war was over and these carnival parties were allowed to recontinue, everybody said, phew, they were so dowdy, so boring, you just went because it was the custom.
Yeah.
And they stopped happening altogether, and no one cried out for them. So I don't think that will be the case if lots of festivals or beer festivals won't happen again or won't take place again. But I think
Yes,
the old adage, if you have done something twice or not done something twice, you won't miss it. And I think a lot could depend on our newly learned behavior and expectations.
Yes, beer consumers
for things to recover or not.
Beer consumers in the UK actually run something like 150 different beer festivals each year, and I think there's a fear that people are getting out of getting out of the routine of doing it. I know there's an enormous amount of frustration. Mm-hmm. CCC,
Yeah.
You have an interest in how people drink and drinking behaviour. How have we been behaving during lockdown?
You know, one big issue is really after the pandemic, the world will be a different one because people are sensitized, for example, for hygienics. And, you know, there's a good reason for it, of course, and there are good aspects that people really aim for more hygienics. But that also means people in the first phase will feel uncomfortable if not everything is done properly to accommodate this, you know, and that's also a problem because we are used to have very efficient beer festivals, for example, because why are they efficient? Because there are a lot of people in dance rooms, or, you know, it's very dense, everything. And also the whole the filling in is very, very efficient because it's just fast and so on. But you will change this. You have to change it. And people are now so sensitive to all these things. They see everywhere. They have the idea that it's making you ill, you know. And this will also affect the small pubs, especially, and also the beer festivals. And I think we have to train people also to comply to these new rules, to have some clever ideas, but still to not to lose the character, because, you know, the character is the asset. It's a clear, yeah. We don't want to go in a sterile condition there, you know, but we want to be safe, of course.
Yeah. Okay, just moving on slightly, and Simon, you sort of alluded to this a bit. Has beer been affected by COVID more than other types of alcoholic beverage? I was fascinated by reading some stuff recently that said, for the first time in 8 or 9 years, last year there appeared to be an increase in directly alcohol-related deaths. And I'm a great skeptic. I'm medically trained. I was a consultant psychiatrist for many years, and I can tell the difference between medical bullshit and medical fact. And what I was expecting to find an awful lot of the former, but when I looked at it, they were actually talking about 2020 seeing direct toxic deaths or illnesses directly related to alcohol. First time of a significant increase, first time of an increase in 8 years, which is fascinating. And it seemed to coincide with a swing away from drinking beer in public places to drinking wine and spirits at home. Anyway, I just put that in as a thought. Would anyone on the panel like to take that first? Or?
I mean, thank you, Tim. I mean, I think on that point you make. I mean, I think overall alcohol consumption has also declined, but what I think, what has happened over the past 12 months is probably, vulnerable people who have problems, who are, what we have seen is more isolation, mental health issues evolving. So I think, where people who have problems with drinking, addicted people, potentially support groups that stopped running. I mean, I think that is certainly a challenge with these vulnerable populations, and you've seen other such sort of social issues that have arisen simply because of the fact that people are cooped up all day and haven't got their sort of their outlets. I mean, I think comparing sort of how beer's been effective compared to other alcoholic beverages, I mean, yes, it's been hit more because of this close tie and sort of mutual dependence with the hospitality sector. But if you think about it, and I'm glad we got onto that, I mean, it's not just the hospitality sector, but all these beer occasions that have been restricted the most. So it's the whole culture, the socializing itself has become a bad thing, and has been banned for weeks and months on end. So it's not just the pubs, bars, and cafes, but it's been big events, but it's also been village festivals, it's weddings, it's concerts, but even sporting events, but even, I mean, here based in Belgium, you weren't allowed to have a barbecue. You're not allowed you're not allowed any friends around. All these even small private social occasions, which are typically beer occasions, have been taken out of the equation. And I'm sure, and I know, for example, from the wine industry, they saw an increase in bag-in-box wine sales have gone up. And if you think about it, there's a certain logic to that. People are now have changed their habits, and they're consuming it at home. So I mean, I think, what we've seen is how important to many consumers is not just the beer, but actually the beer occasion. And people don't want to replace having a beer with their friends in a pub with drinking at home on their own, or even it can be people that typically consume wine maybe at home, and beer when they go out. So take Belgium, for example. Retail sales of beer in Belgium did not go up. In fact, they went down for a lot of that, because and it was the sales of other alcoholic beverages that went up in the retail, and that's a beer country, but the Belgians don't like to switch going to the brasserie with drinking at home.
Yes, it's early days, but I'm fairly hopeful that there is going to be a case to be made that drinking beer on sales is definitely healthier for you than drinking wine at home. I think that's going to be great for the future of brewing, but we need a few more bits of data before we can say that, I think. Only got tongue in cheek there. CCC.
Yeah, we tend to analyze these data always on a very general ground. And as Simon said, there are several groups that are really especially vulnerable. And if you look up the data, it's really dramatic. If you look at anxious people, and especially, I have looked it up, the statistics, people with economic worries, they are super vulnerable. And they are now really often heavy drinkers. And this makes the whole industries, the hospitality industries, susceptible. It's because people tend, again, to overgeneralize and say, well, this is a problem. Beer is a problem. Well, it's a functional thing, and we have to solve the problems that caused the anxiety. We have to fight the anxiety, and then the heavy drinking will stop or will decrease. That's the issue, but not to prohibit any things and so on. So that's always my issue, to really look very selectively, very, very with differentiation on the data, and not just on 9% on average decrease sounds awful, but if you look at the increases, the specific ones, then you really gain very important information.
Yeah, it was interesting in the UK, the Institute of Alcohol Studies, which is a academic institution, but what people don't realize, it's funded by an organization that used to be called the Temperance Movement. It's completely independent, of course. But they've come up with some very interesting data. I think very straightforward data, saying that sales of alcohol in the UK in 2020 were actually 3 or 4% higher than in the previous year. But what is not clear is whether or not they've done that by taking government data on how much money has been raised in excise. What they haven't made clear is whether that was including the pretty large stockpile of wine in particular, but also beer that was imported before Brexit on the 1st of January, looking to save down the line. If they're right, and if there was an increase in alcohol consumption in 2020, that's quite alarming, actually. But yes, hey, Ina, anything on? I know you deal mainly with brewing, so you may not know the data for wines and spirits.
What I can say with some certainty is that if brewers moan that their sales have gone down, they have a reason for that, because alcohol producers are on the whole fairly good at massaging figures. And I don't want to be quoted on that, but that is the case.
You only got 91 people watching you.
So if they moan about declining sales, yes, they went down all over. I know that the anti-alcohol, I don't think I'm allowed to call them the anti-alcohol lobby. I think they are socially concerned citizens. They like to interpret the data their way to actually arrive at some alarmist conclusions like, oh my God, people have been drinking more booze, and therefore we need to increase the excise. We have to reduce opening hours and the full works that you know best, Tim. So yes, I think country by country, the data is different. So there have been shifts from beer to other alcoholic beverages. But I think on the whole, everything just went down because people had fewer occasions, and it's certainly not fun to stay at home and just have yourself for company. But I think for once we can actually trust the big brewers and their forecasts, because whether we like them or not, but they're not stupid. And the reason they are promoting these ridiculous hard seltzers in Europe this year is because they believe that at-home consumption is going to increase in years to come. People are not going to stop being settisauruses. So yes, we may all love to go to the pub, but many people who may soon be facing redundancy or reduced hours or economic hardship of whatever kind, they will be counting their euros or pounds or whatever currency you are on, and they will need to economize, and going to a pub is becoming really expensive. And that is also because, unfortunately, the brewers last year tried to save their skin and their balance sheets by pumping beer into the off-premise at rock bottom prices. I thought it was just a German habit of downpricing your beer and selling it like washing powder without respect for the product. But I saw it happen all over, that promo offers were ubiquitous and permanent. And I think that is also something that bears its own dangers.
Yeah, you mentioned
years to come.
You mentioned hard seltzers there. I think that's something that means different things in different countries, in the sense that hard seltzers have only very recently really been rolled out in the UK, and it hasn't yet attracted as much attention as I think they probably should do. I call them hipster Alco Pops, because as far as I can see, they're the same principle as an Alco Pop.
But Alco Pops, Tim, tasted nice.
Ah, well, no, they tasted sweet. What they've done is they've taken the sugar out.
They were wonderful, Tim. They were wonderful, and that's why they were so vicious. And
Yes.
that's why they attracted youngsters.
This is
I don't
sugar.
think that youngsters will go for hard seltzers the way they went for alcopops.
Well, it'll be interesting. I think hard seltzers are aimed at a slightly older generation.
No. 20 somethings.
Are they? Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I don't know. We'll see. I think for those who haven't come across hard seltzers, they're basically drinks that have got an alcohol content similar to that of beer, or
5%.
Ciders, 5%. They have flavorings in them, and quite a lot of them are produced within the brewing industry.
Mhm.
I don't know whether all of them are, but certainly a high proportion are.
Mm-hmm.
What has been quite alarming in the US is that craft brewers who've got, you know, the full beard, the regulation cap, and all the sort of right-on views are also being taken up by these things, and you're getting craft brewery hard seltzers. I assume because the margin to produce them is much higher.
Mm-hmm.
But that's quite alarming. It sort of brings me on to one of the questions that came up in discussion yesterday. Before the pandemic, some really interesting things were happening in the world of beer, across the whole of Europe, but across the whole of the world, really. And one of them was that different styles of beer, some of which were being revived from 100 years ago, and some of which had really been invented in the last few years, were coming to the fore, and there was greater variety, probably a bigger variety of different types of classy beer were on the market than had been for 100 years. What do we think is going to happen to that after the pandemic is over and things are settling back to something, a new normal? Do we think that's going to thrive, or do you think that's going to be suppressed, or what? I don't stick it. CCC.
So first of all, what most people don't think of is people will in the future make a lot of home officing. You know, this changes the whole working world, and this also means that you have now better the chance to drink at home also during the day. So I did it already before, but that's another issue. But you know, the important thing is if there will be a lot of home drinking, much more than before, and if the brewing industries with these really the nice new beers, the various beers and so on, and have really a good distribution system, then I propose, then I really predict that the consumption of these new jewels, they will increase. It will increase, definitely, because people have more time, they devote more time on these things, and so the variety will increase. But only if the distribution system is easy to catch, because most people don't like to, you know, to pay a lot of money by special distributors or so. So this is essential for me.
Yeah. Sorry, I was just distracted there, but by a question from the chat room that is it's sort of pertinent to this. Taking us back to something we were talking about earlier, because I take your point about the increase of drinking at home, and I think the home drinking culture might get very interesting. But Brian B, who was ironically having to move from the pub to somewhere else and having to change, so he was offline for a time. I don't know whether he's back. He said, when we were talking about a more resilient pub culture, and I think in this context, I'm thinking a pub culture that can start to bring people back from home drinking to more social drinking in public places, by which I mean buildings, not parks. What do we mean by a resilient pub culture? What would be a good resilient pub culture? A few ideas that might improve pub culture. You're all, none of you are muted, the panel.
So
who wants to pitch in?
Maybe I start first, because I also took this term resilient pub culture. So first of all, what I saw here specifically in Bavaria, most breweries or pub breweries had no chance to really change their distribution system. That was a problem. You know, they are used to have barrels or kegs or so, but no big bottling. That is a problem. The second thing is they don't have the area to host people outside in such a dimension that they need, you know, and there, you know, all the communities, they are really needed to give them away for a while, at least, places, squares, areas where people can be in a, you know, in just gathering together and not coming to the pub. So it's important to have adaptive structures and also distribution structures.
Yeah. That's quite a technical thing in terms of what a more resilient pub, if you like, would look like. I mean, I'll fire off from the UK point of view. One of the things that sort of struck me about the pub business in the UK over the last 10 years is that increasingly it's diverging into two types of pub. There's one that's large and does everything and sells food and has got room for children and they encourage dogs to come and blah, 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 blah. Does absolutely everything. They're often pretty boring. They're no doubt very successful businesses. They employ a lot of people, but for them to stand out from other opportunities to do things in the evening is quite difficult. You've then got a micro pub culture of places that are really quite retro and are down to groups of people coming together, no music, little in the way of food. They come together, they drink beer, they have conversation, they sometimes read newspapers. And until fairly recently, that was an old man thing. Nowadays, that's not an old man thing. Certainly, there are equivalents of that where it's a young person's culture, but they're small and they're a limited offer, but they're about conversation and they're usually about quite interesting beers. I'm just wondering whether resilient pub culture needs to get away from this idea of large chains of pubs owned by property companies and run by usually quite poorly paid people. To then grow something that's a bit more bespoke. I'm trying to be provocative.
I mean, just the word resilient. I mean, I'm a bit concerned when I sort of hear it in the sense that we've just gone through 15 months where it's not really been a question of resilience. It's just been some pubs have been in the unfortunate situation that they haven't got an outdoor space, and consequently they can't serve at the moment. Or their business model, they're so small that it doesn't make sense to open at a 50% capacity. And I think that's the concern. Is what will get lost is actually, there's always some businesses that were already close to the edge that probably it's accelerated their demise. But there are these other businesses that they don't have an outdoor space. That it was a perfectly good business model they had that has been tested by this surreal social experiment of shutting everything, and then opening up some places, but not others. And the challenge that I'm sure it's happened in other countries, but in Belgium when they opened the bars again outside, unsurprisingly, it was raining. And lots of businesses decided not to open, especially places restaurants, for example, where, if it suddenly started to rain, what do you do with the customers who are sat outside? You can't, they can't rush inside. You probably want these people to settle their bills. I mean, it didn't make sense, and so I think the resilience at the moment is a slightly strange concept, and I think. It's also interesting to look at sort of the different types of breweries, how they've been affected, and the ones that have been able to done better are the ones who already had access to retail channels. The ones who and then there were the ones who were able to adapt a bit quicker than others. But what we've seen is that everyone has been hit, but some have been able to at least mitigate for some of the losses simply by nature of that was their business model. And you know, maybe it's a matter now of companies having to diversify in case of global pandemics. And it's, you know, it's a bizarre thing to have to factor into your business model, that you might be suddenly shut from one day to the next.
I think it's interesting to compare how pubs work in the UK with how pubs work in Belgium. And I'm probably going to generalize here and upset the Belgians in the audience. But my understanding was that there was my experience was that there's a pub is only a pub for a certain length of time in Belgium. Or very often there is the license or whatever is renewed every 7 years or so. And so there is an extent to which bars in Belgium are or cafes in Belgium are akin to restaurants more generally around the world, which is that they're constantly reinventing themselves. And we don't see that in some countries. In England and in the UK and Ireland, pubs are in the same place, in the same buildings, often with the same name for decades, if not centuries. And there is not this tradition of new businesses generating frequently all over the place, which there are in other countries. I wonder whether we, in a sense, we need to move towards that model a lot more, because it's the genesis of new pubs in UK and Ireland in particular, and I suspect elsewhere that might be more of the future, if we're going to get this sort of resilience in the future. I take your point about the last 15 months. And yeah, I started talking.
Tim, we've got a few questions. Shall I just read out just a few at random?
Yeah. So
I'll just pose a few of them, and then I'll suggest if you want to pick them up as you wish. So one of the questions or comments came up 100 years ago. We had the World War I, Spanish flu, and then that was followed by the Roaring Twenties. So I guess the question's asking, after this period of depression, is it likely that we're going to have a major uplift? And I guess, and the subsequent question is, what will that look like? You've already mentioned the one about the resilient pub culture. Could the expected change of beer consumers' behaviour happen to be more in favour of craft beer compared with mainstream beer?
Do you want to shall we take the first one of those?
Yeah, feel free, because I think there's probably so many.
Yeah, I think those are both interesting questions. Are we going to have the equivalent of the Roaring Twenties? As a doing my EOR bit of bearing in mind the changes that might happen with climate change. How do we think things are going to go? CCC.
So there's one really essential difference to the situation 100 years ago. Of course, there was also a pandemic and a crisis before, war, and we had an economic crisis before, and so on. You can see a lot of parallels, but people are mostly now concerned about one thing. That is not the pandemic. It is really climate change, the future of the planet. And this changes the whole, there are now questions about artisanal beer, about organic things and so on, and the craft beer, individualism, and so on. It changes, and it has really changed our whole culture. And I think this will be the trend for the next 15, 20 years. So after the pandemic, this will continue, and this trend to craft beer will increase. I'm pretty sure, if it's not totally going crazy in terms of being expensive or so.
Just to cut across people, I need to disappear somewhere for a couple of minutes just to deal with something. If you can keep this conversation going, I should be back with you in about 2.5 minutes.
Can I say something, please?
Yeah, go ahead.
I would generalize that our attitude to life in this decade is far less full of abandon as it was in the 1920s, according to the literature that we can read for testimonies. So we have been told to be far more politically correct, far more morally sober and refined, that all of this would stand in the way of a rerun of the Roaring '20s. And I think we also have far more concerns on our plate than our forefathers or foremothers had 100 years ago. I think what Tim said, beer diversity and how that was affected by the pandemic. I don't think there's nothing to worry about. Beer diversity is here to stay. And thanks to all the movements towards direct-to-consumer shipping, we will still be able to get the beers we want. I don't think that we now have to rely on the supermarkets to provide the choice. They won't, because they will use the pandemic to actually do some shelf clearing and just provide the space for the big brewers' bulging portfolios. So that's their game. Consumers, if you're internet savvy, you can find the beers, but it takes more of an effort. You also have to start reading beer blogs and find out what there is. So it takes more time and an effort to drink differently and flavorfully each evening, but it can be done. And I think quite easily nowadays too. So whether that actually translates into increased business for craft breweries, I don't know. Perhaps they will do better once they are allowed to reopen the tap rooms. But apart from that, for the consumer, I don't think there's much to worry about. But it's just what I want to emphasize. You won't find the beers in the supermarkets, and most likely you won't find them in the on-premise either.
I'm glad you mentioned that. You know, I mean, that was the one point I wanted to make today is what one thing that's been, it was going to happen anyway, but it's been massively accelerated, is this increase in online sales in e-commerce web shops, which means that, yeah, I mean, if you go to a supermarket, it's often not a very large selection as well. So it is people who usually wouldn't do online shopping are now doing online shopping, and it's suddenly, and Tim mentioned it as well. I think the adaptability of some of these smaller businesses, the willingness to work together, which I thought was very interesting in terms of teaming up, has meant that there are suddenly people discovering who, yeah, perhaps would try the different beers available in their supermarket during their weekly shop, have suddenly discovered that that you can actually pretty easily get access to a wider variety and just try something different. And then obviously you try something different, and some things you'll like, some things you won't. But I think that has certainly been accelerated. And I was also interested in what you said at the beginning, Ina, about the fact that you didn't think many breweries would have actually closed, although it may be that may be something that hits them at the end of this year. I mean, I would closely link the diversity of beers that are out there to the numbers of breweries that are out there as well. And I mean, the last 5 years, if I can refer back to our publication that Tim was very happily plugging earlier, which showed that basically 1,000 breweries were opening in Europe every year on aggregates. And obviously that leads to diversity, because all of these breweries had multiple brands, multiple beer styles, and I think that is certainly the color that has been brought into the beer industry over the last 10 years, and has also encouraged the larger brewing companies to up their game as well. I mean, there's a reason that they get into that side of the business as well, because they see that that's what consumers are interested in.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, it was very interesting. I was until about 6 weeks ago, I've been living in Bristol for 6 weeks, for 6 years, and it has a very lively small brewery scene. It's got about the best part of 20 small breweries, and watching their response to the pandemic, I was just concerned that they would have a chance of surviving. So I was just promoting the fact that some of them were delivering locally. But I then started following what they were actually doing as a business model, and up to about a couple of weeks ago, 15 of them would deliver anywhere on the UK mainland. simply because they were using the courier services. Now, this would have been unthinkable 15 months ago. I'm sure if COVID hadn't happened, most Bristol breweries would be delivering most of their beer within the Bristol area, and a few would be joining national circuits for distribution. So that's been great. I do wonder, trying to link this with the response to climate change, I do wonder whether there's going to be more and more emphasis on pubs in particular and supermarkets being encouraged to differentially supply beers that are made within 15 kilometers or whatever, 20 kilometers of where the outlet is. I think that's quite an attractive thing to look at in terms of keeping carbon footprint down. And where you've got beers that are broadly similar styles, why get one from 300 miles away if you go 300 kilometers away if you can get one from 10 kilometers away? Answer, well, if it's really a good one, then fine. But
Tim, I object. I'm all for choice that if it's on the top of my head to have that new Belgian beer, I want it. Mind you, I can't get it because I'm stuck in Germany where these beers are mostly unavailable.
Well, you haven't Brexited. I must admit, this is just an idea I've been formulating for a time. It strikes me that beers that are much of a muchness, and then they may even be, good. Cask ale is a very good example in the UK. There are a lot of good producers of local cask ales. There aren't that many that are producing stonkingly good cask ales that are so far ahead of the rest that they should be available everywhere. If you go to bottled beers, then I have two good examples in front of me. I'm using the appallingly bad taste camera didn't happen Great British Beer Festival glass, which is covered in coronaviruses, subject to dreadful castigation in the national press, and of course they led to them selling every single one. I have a good beer here. It's Jaipur from Thornbridge. I haven't been paid to promote this, and it's not my intention. It just happens to be one of the ones I keep in my house because it's jolly good. It's not local, but it's so good that I don't feel guilty about bringing it to you.
There you go.
And another example, just randomly, only because this is about the last beer I've got from Belgium, Duchesse de Bourgogne, really good oak-aged brown ale. I would love to be able to continue to drink that in Devon, and I wouldn't feel in the least bit compromising of my impact on the planet, because it's so good that it should be internationally exported. I don't think the same way about beers that are actually the same as 500 other ones. I think there is a case to say those can be produced more and more locally. CCC, you've got your hand up.
Exactly. This is the point. The standard beer should be and will be more from the region, and of course nobody should prohibit to let us order a beer from somewhere, because we just love to have this specific beer. But this is a very conscious consumption, and not just the Heineken that is the standard, although it's 1,000 kilometers away produced. That won't be the standard model, I predict. But great to have good beers in a conscious way from all over the world, of course. But this is then an extra and not the standard.
I mean, we talked about different alcoholic drinks. I mean, I think that is, we're sort of talking about between different breweries and between different beers. Compare the beer industry with the wine industry and the spirits industry. It's a very different model. And I think, as sustainability becomes more important, I think there are opportunities for brewers, the brewing sector as a whole, to communicate more about this localness, which I think is actually is important, but not just sustainability that comes from the localness, but all the other actions that the breweries are taking to cut down their environmental footprint, whether that be where they're getting their energy from, how they're treating their water, how they're using their secondary materials. I think we will certainly see increasingly brewers and indeed companies in general and brands in general competing on sustainability, and it will move up the hierarchy of consumers, as Ina says rightly, not at the expense of good taste and good quality. I think it's the same. People like to try something local, at least try it once. But again, if the product is rubbish, they're not going to carry on consuming it. And I think there will always be that niche for the unique product. And I think that will also continue to push the innovation that's been going on in the brewing sector of new styles, but also, as you mentioned, of reinventing very old styles and traditional beers.
It was just picking up on that point. One of the things I was quite conscious of over the last couple of years before the pandemic was there seemed to me to be a two-headed issue arising. Beer was starting to become sexy because there was much more interest in small breweries. There was much more interest in new and old beer styles that have been revived. There started to be a sort of connoisseur market of good beer. And meanwhile, at the same time, the what I call industrial beers, which I know is not a very popular way of looking at it for some people, but the supermarket beers, the big brands, were tending to drift away in terms of their sales. And there was quite a lot of potential in the sense that the larger brewers had quite a lot of control over the market and very, very, very good access to the market. Smaller brewers, mainly a lot of difficulties, but in a funny sort of way, they needed each other and they were starting to work together in collaborative ways. I just wonder whether COVID is what impact that will have on COVID. In particular, I fear that large companies might come out of this by just buying up and attempting to use the brands of smaller companies, creating a market that they've tried before. They produce beers with the right names and they can't do it properly because their cost accountants say get the cost down. You can vaguely see where I'm going with this question. I'm trying to formulate it into a question, but how are large brewers going to behave as they come out of COVID, particularly in regard to the craft market, I think is probably what I'm asking.
Shall I offer an opinion?
You can offer an opinion, yes.
Okay. I'd say for the past 20 years, it was craft brewers and craft beers that carried the beer conversation. Despite the marketing and the advertising that came out from the big brewers, they didn't have anything meaningful to add to the conversation because they couldn't talk about flavors and they couldn't certainly provide the personal stories like how I started out as a home brewer in my shed and how I upgraded to eventually build this brewery. And now here's the best beer I can offer to you and you better love it. That sort of narrative the big brewers could not offer, but the little guys could. And suddenly, while we consumed beer, we had something to talk about, namely the product and the brewers. The big brewers will come out of the pandemic, and they're already doing so, by moving beyond beer. That is for pure financial reasons, because they know, and this is what the forecasters have told them, that the share of throat that is currently enjoyed by beer is going to shrink. So it is kind of a lost labor of love to throw more money at standard or Pilsner style beer brands. So they will move into these novel segments, what are called alternative adult beverages, which include all the various mixes and these damned hard seltzers, as I say. So because they want to be in that sector, and that segment is going to boom. at least according to the forecasters. And it's never good if you're a stock market listed company to quarrel with the analysts who have been breakfast on the statistics and forecasts. So this is what they are going to do, which means that it's the craft brewers that will continue with the beer conversation on their own, which is not a bad thing, because this is what they have been doing for the past 20 years.
Yes, I always used to, people were forever saying to me, because I think everybody knows I'm pretty pro independent brewery, but people would say, well, you shouldn't be, we should be fair to everybody, and if a large brewer produces a really good beer, we should be very complimentary about it. And I would say, yes, I agree in principle, it's never happened in practice. It's got quite interesting. I'm really not being paid to promote any of these beers. Pilsner Urquell is a really interesting beer. And I am pretty certain that in the last 3 to 4 years in particular, it's become a really top-rate Bohemian Pilsner. It's developed a character that is reproducible, it's produced in vast quantities, and it's really excellent, and it's owned by Asahi. So it's the first example I can think of a really top-rate beer being produced in vast quantities by a large brewery, or global brewer really. And in a sense, I want to encourage that. I would love to see a Budweiser premium that is actually of some sort of classical American lager that's just better than everything else. I don't think it's going to happen, but I'd love to see that. But my feeling is it's not going to happen because the financial models for very large breweries are not compatible with the attention to detail that is required for a really excellent beer.
Or the attention that you have to give to a portfolio.
Yes. And this whole issue of brand is not just a name, it's an image and whatever. And it's not quite like that. Pilsner Urquell is not a brand name, it is a specific beer. And you can do great things with that. You're not obliged to do it to all the other beers produced by that company across the world because it's that one name. But it's been very disappointing to me over the years. There are a number of really, but Sierra Nevada is a good example of very, very good beer that's produced in vast quantities. It can be done, but they, as I think a lot of people know, they're a company where the attention to detail has cost them billions over the years. They just happen to like making a large production, very good beer. We don't see more of those coming over the horizon. CCC.
Yeah, but Ina's point was also a very, very important one about the narratives. You know, we are fed up with these standard narratives made by standard marketing agencies, very big marketing agencies, telling us that's the best beer and so on. With Pilsner Urquell, you know, it's also a special story. It was the first one of its kind in 1842. So that is a story, you know, and it has a wonderful design that has not changed so much and so on. So you feel authenticity, although maybe it's not so authentic anymore. But with the other brands, it's now really becoming a little bit a problem because they tell a story that, you know, all the insurance companies tell you and so on. They are always for you and it's the beer for you, but it's not. It's not the beer for you. And so I think I really trust in the future of the smaller breweries because they can build up identity. I see it here around. People, you know, young students from all over the world, they identify with the breweries here at the place. They say, you know, they start here a career and they import their beer and they say, well, that's much better. And then after a while, they say, well, this is really the best feeling. It's the local beer. We love it. But it's also a good beer, I have to say. Yeah. So as Simon said, if you don't like it, it doesn't make sense, of course. Yeah.
If I can just come in, I mean, you won't find me talking about big versus small or old versus versus new, but
totally unfair, yeah.
And but I mean, but I do like to talk about beer versus wine, and I think that's where brewers see that the diversity helps, because it brings, I think it's certainly opened people's eyes to the beer category as a whole. Whereas in the past, if there was only one style of beer that was out there, or that you could easily access, then it was very easy to say, I don't like beer. And I think now there is both that diversity out there, but also this movement to try something local, try something new, test something out. And I think that is where all brewers see that if someone is suddenly open to drinking beer again, then there are opportunities for everyone. And I think this whole sort of concept of if the let's have the cake as big as you can get it, and then the companies fight out about how you divide that cake. I think that is the sort of that's the thinking that means that associations like the Brewers of Europe exist, and that national associations exist, because there are companies that see there are advantages to working together, even though they will be competing like hell on the market. And I mean, I always tell people that I mean, the large companies, they're fighting against each other. They're not teamed up. Companies don't tend to team up to fight others. So but I think what's most interesting is this shift into understanding, is the number of beer consumers actually increasing? And I think that that's an interesting trend that would be interesting to see as we move forward. And I think on sustainability, that might be an area where brewers are able to position themselves on you haven't really talked about it on alcohol and health, the relatively lower alcohol content of beer when compared to other drinks. I think all of these are opportunities to be optimistic about the future for beer, even within a situation where people are more health concerned and where there are more, and I will use the term, anti-alcohol people out there.
Yeah. I had a comment, Tim, from a certain El Presidente, a founding chairman of EBCU. You may or may not know him, everyone, but his question, his comment really is, with the move to sort of more interesting brewers and other gin producers, distillers, etc., is an opportunity for them to work together. Will they, by their very nature, start working together to basically share each other's products and turn, so I guess, small sort of businesses into ones that can be sort of more influential by doing that? And just to remind you, Tim, we've got about 8 minutes until the session's due to finish.
Yeah. I was going to ask Simon an unfair question. Can you see large breweries reopening small breweries locally?
I don't know.
I shouldn't have shot that one at you.
You'll ask them.
Yes. Okay. Fair enough. Yeah, it's fairly well known. One of my things is I think working models between very large breweries that have got excellent distribution, excellent access to market, etc., and small breweries that have got the inventiveness, the creativity, and the absolute dedication to product rather than necessarily bottom line. I think that's got huge potential, but it does need an awful lot of shifting on both sides of that equation for that to happen. But I think that would be jolly good for beer overall. And I do agree with what you said, Simon, entirely about beer versus the rest of alcoholic beverage. I think we've got some interesting times coming up.
And beer versus hard seltzer potentially as well.
Yes. Yeah, there might be some conflict of interest there, is the only problem. Yeah. Yes. Anyway, we've got about 5 minutes to go. Brett, have you spotted anything on the question board that we haven't covered?
Let me just check. I think you've covered most of it. There's been a lot of interest about seltzer beers, a lot of comments made about it. And I think a lot of people said they thought it was an issue in their own country. They didn't realise it was elsewhere.
Yeah, I noticed that Tom Carroll from the US, who's joined us again, was quite surprised it was an issue outside the US. It is quite a big issue in the US, I think. I mean, I have to say on hard seltzers, I think it's one of the most cynical, nasty trends in the alcohol trade that there is. I think it's also counterproductive because although I don't have an awful lot of time for what I call the neo-prohibitionists, I think they twist data, medical data in particular, to a completely indefensible extent, and it needs to be outed. Nonetheless, nobody's sort of standing up for everybody drinking more and getting health problems. Hard seltzers seems to me to be an invitation to drink too much for people who as yet don't understand that they shouldn't be.
Quite a few comments about localism as well, Tim. That's come up quite a number of times. People asking if there's an opportunity for smaller businesses to actually be a bit more sort of able to do things in a more environmentally sustainable way. And one suggestion was the use of brewery waste for direct heating.
I think the impact on climate change, impact on the environment is one of the big issues that's going to come in the next couple of years in the brewing trade. You've already seen Carlsberg in particular, Heineken, others launching some really quite coherent and large projects to reduce impact on the environment. It's a challenge for small breweries, but then what they do have going for them is local distribution with short supply runs. And they also have reduced spend on sort of marketing equipment and all that sort of stuff. As marketing, the whole shebang around marketing they don't do, which also saves environmentally. Packaging is the word I'm looking for. Any other comments from the panel just on that general issue of the environmental? I mean, I know it's a huge thing and it's very difficult to cover in the last 3 minutes, but
I mean, Tim, perhaps if I can make a pretty shameless plug and I mean, we have our annual event, the Brewers Forum, which is usually an in-person event, but we've had to go online. That's running from the 1st to the 4th of June, and I know there's a session on hard seltzer on the first day. The 4th day is completely devoted to sustainability, and there's actually a section around sort of secondary materials, what brewers are doing in terms of some of the include smaller brewers and larger brewers in terms of their creativity and getting down their footprint. So it's a shameless plug, but as it happens, it's accessible to everyone this year, whereas normally it's being a physical event, it's only for people that are really in the business.
yeah, I'm perfectly happy for that shameless plug to go ahead. I would just agree that Brewers of Europe Forum is one of the great beer events of Europe. And the fact that it's accessible this year is if you've got a real interest in beer, attempt to be there. And I will also plug for those beer consumers, because I think most of you are active consumers in the audience, the Brewers of Europe Beer Statistics Annual is absolutely compulsory viewing, as is the Bath Haas Hops Review. Also, Ina, I will just say that Brauwelt International, which is now available in the English language, is the beer magazine that anybody who's a serious beer consumer who wants to go is the one you've got to read, and in particular Ina's column. In fact, you write about half of it nowadays, don't you?
I write the news, so you read me every week online, okay. So if you want to.
Okay. CCC, I don't think you actually have a commercial product on the market. No, that's okay.
Not at all.
Oh, that's fine. I only have the World Atlas of Beer, which is unparalleled encyclopedic book that can tell you how the whole of the world of beer is doing.
I'm glad we've already gone to the commercial break.
All right.
I think that's the time to wind up. I definitely think that's the time to wind up. Thank you very much indeed, my fellow panel members. I was delighted to have all of you on the panel. It's gone, I think, pretty well. I judge from the fact that very few members of the audience have actually signed off. In fact, I don't think anybody has, that we must have been keeping people entertained. I hope you enjoyed it. EBCU is the European Beer Consumers Union. It is the umbrella group for all the consumers groups around Europe. And we wish it long life and health. Thank you very much, everybody.
Cheers, people.
And that's it.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.
Thanks.
Thank you. If you could complete the evaluation, be much appreciated.